the recording now. And on behalf of the African Women's Development Fund USA, welcome. My name is Obenawa Amponsa. I am a coach and facilitator who is based in Johannesburg, South Africa. But from the name, you can probably tell I'm originally from Ghana. And from the accent, you will definitely know I spent a good deal of time in the US. But it's really my pleasure and my honor to facilitate this conversation amongst African women from across the continent today. And as you know, we are going to be speaking about the impact of COVID-19, the current pandemic, specifically on African women. But let me just start off by saying first, thank you so much for being with us this evening. It is a rather intimate group by design because we wanted to ensure that we were really able to hear your thoughts and your perspective in the true spirit of dialogue. We also know that in the past few weeks, since lockdowns of various types have happened across the world, there's been a proliferation of webinars, conference calls, online forums. And so we know that there are many places that you could have been at this moment in time. And we're very appreciative that you came to lend your voice, your experience, your perspectives to us here today. So thank you for being here. And of course, I would in particular like to thank and acknowledge Her Excellency Ambassador Abena Busia, who is the Republic of Ghana's ambassador to Brazil. But she has given us permission in good West African style to call her Auntie Abby. So Auntie Abby, thank you very much for being here. Welcome. And of course, Auntie Abby is on the board of the African Women's Development Fund, the USA chapter. Before we go any further, a couple of housekeeping details as we begin. Again, we know that from across the continent and the international community, we have different bandwidths and the like. But if possible, please do turn on your camera, even if just for a little while. We would love to see your gorgeous face and just get a sense of who it is that we are speaking with. In addition to that, we know that many of you are caretakers. So if a little face comes on camera or even a big face, or there's a cry, or let's be honest, a scream in the background, that's okay too. This is part of the reason that we create these safe spaces for us. I would ask though that when you are not speaking, please do put yourself on mute just so that we can minimize background noise. And please do familiarize yourself with the various settings. There is the chat function where you can send a message to me if you have a question, or better yet, to the overall group. Zoom has also become fancy, in case you don't know, and we have our reaction buttons at the bottom. So feel free to give an applause or a thumbs up during the course of our conversation today. So again, thank you so much for being with us. We're going to have various forms and ways of engaging one another, both in terms of chat, small group, and large group discussions. But before we delve too deeply into that, I'd like to invite Mame Afon Yelbert Sai, who is the chairperson of the African Women Development Fund, the US chapter, just to give us a little bit of context about the AWDF and why it is that we are all gathered here today. Over to you, Mame.
Thank you so much, Obenewa. I'm so thrilled that we get to gather because I strongly believe that when we gather as women, magic happens, whether it's virtual or in person. The power, in fact, the collective power of women is something that we can never suppress, we can never deny, and we can never undermine or overlook. And so for me, this is so thrilling that we get to do this. You know, I would just say something briefly, but I would want Auntie Abby to also just, you know, mention something, say a little bit about AWDF. But basically 20 years ago, actually, you know, this year marks 20 years. 20 years ago, 3 badass African women said, and I quote a line from Pretty Woman. If you've seen Julia Roberts' Pretty Woman, I love that movie. I've seen it about 20 times. But there's a part where I love what she said. She says, I say who, I say what, I say when, and I say how much. These 3 badass African women decided that African women needed to tell their own stories. African women needed not to be given a handout, but to mobilize the resources and put it in their hands, because they sit where the issues that are being talked about is happening. They hold the solutions in their hands. And so we needed to put resources, whether it's network, whether it's financial, we put it in the hands of African women and watch them do magic with it. And that is how these three African women, including Auntie BC, who is currently the First Lady of Ekiti State, Auntie Joanna of blessed memory from Ghana, and then Auntie Hilda, who is from Uganda, came together and AWDF was born. Around that time, we also recognized the importance of connecting with African women and girls who happen to be in the diaspora. And that is how AWDF USA was also born. And now in 2020, our big goal at AWDF USA is to ensure that we can amplify the voices of African women and girls. We can make visible the contributions, the achievements, and what it is that African women and girls in the diaspora are bringing to the table. The other thing that we really want to do through a campaign that we have launched recently called the Amplify Her campaign is to ensure that we bridge the gap between African women who are on the continent and those who happen to be in the diaspora. It is not enough to talk at each other. We have to move from talking at each other to talking with each other and for each other. And so that is where we find ourselves at AWDF USA. And you know, in these unprecedented times, one of the things that we figured is, okay, if we can't gather personally, in person, what can we do differently? And we decided that we have this a series called the AfriWomen Hangout, where we have intergenerational conversations, any kind of conversation you can think about that concerns African women, no matter where you are. And we thought this would be a great way to kick off our AfriWomen Hangout sessions virtually. So that is what brings us here today. And I'm so excited that our team is able to do that. And in doing this, we are fulfilling the two things I mentioned: amplifying voices and creating connections intercontinentally and with the diaspora. So with that, I'll let Auntie Abby add a few words if she's able to. And my thing.
Yes, thank you, Mami. I won't say much more except to say, for me, that we've reached this point is so exciting, because at transitional moments like this, I always remember the first meeting that our three founding mothers invited me to. And we sat in a now defunct Chinese restaurant opposite the Millennium Hotel in New York, thinking about AWDF's vision statement and mission statement. We wrote it in that restaurant and distributed it. And I was invited by them, and I always have to say this in acknowledgement of their vision, because I was not an obvious choice to join them. I was not an activist. I'm not a philanthropist. I was not in those kinds of WILDAF spaces that they came from. I was in the academy. I'm a university professor. And yes, I was on the board of the Center for Women's Global Leadership at Rutgers. They're the organization that started the 19 days. So I was, you know, they knew who I was in terms of my commitment, but I was very honored to be asked to join, and I became the first program committee chair. But the thing that has always been inspiring over the last 20 years, and the thing that keeps the commitment, for me at least, fresh, is what happened at that first meeting 20 years ago. Because it was at the Beijing +5 meeting that, and they had been working through Beijing and so on to establish this. But by the time we reached Beijing +5, everything was set up, the office was set up, we were sort of ready to go. And they'd even done some background work, as they knew, to get commitments from organizations. But at that meeting, what we had built was a launch, a cocktail party. It wasn't even officially a fundraiser. We had a small cocktail party in that hotel just to say, hey, we've launched, this is who we are, this is what we're trying, you know, come and find us in Ghana. And so at that meeting were women like yourselves, people who were the people whose small African activist organizations had sent them to the Commission on the Status of Women, the NGO people who came to the, and we all know what that's like, right? We show up looking wonderful and so on, but we're all on a very tight budget and have come to do very specific things. So what really moved me at that meeting was I was emceeing and, you know, introducing people and did a short poetry reading and so on. And the women there were so excited. The continental-based African women there were so excited about this idea that they started pledging as a good faith part of their own per diem. You know, because they hadn't come, some people had come prepared, but most people, this was like being announced. By the end of that evening, we had $14,000 in cash and pledges. And that's when it really hit me how to the heart of who we are, this organization, the African Women's Development Fund, was reaching. We've gone through ups and downs and tests and trials, both AWDF and AWDF USA. We won't give that history here, except, you know, there have been times, and Mami and Moyata especially know, we spent a few years just treading water, just saying, let's just keep looking at ourselves to tell ourselves we exist still, because the challenge of being an organization to raise the consciousness about continental African women outside of the continent is tough. It's tough. And so that we've got to this point where I feel there's been such a wonderful transition. I'm the last of the old timers left, and such a wonderful transition to you guys who are thinking differently, raising differently, doing different things like this. Using social media platforms, being able to roll with the punches and say, let's do Zoom and so on, to keep the organization going is really, I consider it one of the most important things I've done with my life, is this organization. And so thank you for having the vision and finding ways to keep going and keep the sisterhood alive and relevant and part of the conversation, which is what we're doing. You know, when I was at college, African women didn't matter to anybody, What we thought, what we said, you know, even things like, if you look at, for example, the Heinemann African Writers list, about which we're all so proud, how many of us are women there? You know, it's just, we were just not there. And so to be able to have been a part of a number of things that have made us visible as a community and as a power force to be reckoned with is really wonderful. And hats off to you. This is great. This is great. We're now up to 20 people. This is fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you, Auntie Abi, for your remarks and for giving us that history, but most importantly for your contributions, for being a trailblazer who's created organizations like AWDF and actually created spaces for us to be seen, for us to be heard, for us to tell our stories. So again, thank you so much for your gifts and your contributions over the years. And thank you, Mame, as well, the new generation, the new vanguard of leadership, for bringing us together here today. And I think both in Mame's contributions and Auntie Abby's, we really hear why we are gathered and why the focus on African women. We will know that at the best of times, life is not easy for us. We will know that at the worst of times, particularly in pandemics like this, as women, we are disproportionately affected. We are disproportionately affected because the burden of childcare and elder care tends to fall on us. We know the financial impacts of both of pandemics and economic downturns, both in the short term as well as in the long term. We also know that the industries where women are overrepresented and where women dominate, such as tourism and hospitality, have been very badly impacted by this pandemic. And additionally, the realities of gender-based violence that so many women suffer from, and to know that many people are literally locked down with their abusers during this period of time is something that we also need to be aware of. And finally, many of the people who are dealing with this pandemic on the front line, who are nurses and healthcare workers, are women. And we know that many in the diaspora and on the continent are African women specifically. So very much at the coalface of this as a community. But in addition to that, we will know that as Black people, as people of African descent, even at the best of times, the wage gaps and access to healthcare are not what they ought to be. And then we layer on top of that what it means to be an immigrant, oftentimes in different locations. That creates yet another layer of complexity. And we all know the responsibilities that we have to families and to communities back home in contexts where healthcare systems are often fragile and weak. And so this leaves us with a lot to deal with at the best of times and an overwhelming amount of things to deal with at the worst of times. Yet, as Auntie Abby has so beautifully articulated in her story, we also know that as African women, we come from a history of resilience, we come from a history of innovation, we come from a history of self-reliance. And so the reason that we're gathered here today is not only to recount the burdens, although we want to hear those, but to understand what are best practices and things that you are doing, that you've seen done, that we might all be able to learn from to help us not only survive this moment of the pandemic, but really to thrive in it. And so tonight with this dialogue, or excuse me, today or this afternoon or this morning, wherever you are in the world, with this dialogue, we first and foremost want to create a safe space for us to talk about the issues that are affecting us. We also want to showcase some of the solutions in terms of addressing this pandemic, and we want to gain insights into your needs so that we can develop programs and other interventions moving forward that might be able to address them. And then on top of that, we really want to build community, a community to support ourselves, whether we are an academic like Auntie Abby, an activist, business people, whatever it might be, to know that we're in it together and for the long term. And so in that spirit, in terms of building community, what I'd like to do is to put us into small groups of about 3 people per group. And we're just gonna take about 5 or 6 minutes. And it's an opportunity really to introduce yourself to people. And what we'd like to know from you is your name, your current location, your place of origin, and what is the thing about this pandemic that has struck you the most? Is it the fragility of economic and healthcare systems? Is it the kindness and generosity? Is it that you finally managed to sleep a full night because you didn't have to get up and go to the office? But we want to know what those things are, the good and the not so good that have struck you and stood out to you during this time. So I'm going to divide us into groups. I will not be in a group, but I will peep in from time to time. In a moment or two, you are going to get an invitation to join a breakaway group. If you'd please go ahead and accept that. I will give you a 2-minute warning before it's time to come back, and then you'll automatically be brought back at the 1-minute mark. Thank you. Rebecca, did you receive an invitation to join a group? Okay, great.
Just work on a daily basis and does not have the opportunity or the money to run and secure food for their family. So food security is what struck me the most during this pandemic.
Hi everyone, my name is Chama. I'm based in New Jersey in the United States, but I'm originally from Nigeria. I'm currently a master's in public health student, and I think what struck me the most is the lack of support for healthcare workers. A lot of healthcare workers have young children or family they need to care for, and they're not being given proper protective equipment and other things that they need to support their families during this time. So that's what struck me the most.
With head wraps in the same group.
It's amazing.
So how are you ladies doing today?
I'm doing good.
Fine. Okay. So I am based in Silver Spring, Maryland in US.
Okay, I am based in Cameroon.
Okay.
And I am in Ghana.
Oh, nice, nice.
All right.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I'm
My
just eavesdropping, but I grew up in Columbia, so not far from Silver Spring. But I don't have a head wrap, so I'm just going to go back to being quiet and just listen.
Right. So my name is actually Onyinye. I'm Nigerian American.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So my name is Kechapetula Isga.
Kechabe.
Originally from Cameroon.
Okay, and I am Gloria Akra from Ghana.
Hello, ladies. Ajwa? Ajwa, can you hear me? Hello, Ajwa. Are you able to hear me? Glory, are you able to hear me?
Yes, I can, Benewa.
Brilliant, brilliant. I am your host for this evening. Welcome to, or I keep saying evening, I'm not certain where you are in the world. Welcome. We have just—
It's evening here.
Okay, and where are you based, Glory?
Nigeria.
Okay, brilliant. And Ajwa, where are you based? Let me unmute you. Okay, there you go, Ajwa. Where are you based?
Brooklyn, New York.
Ah, brilliant. So the other ladies are just introducing themselves in groups, and please feel free to be a group yourself. They're going to come on back in about another minute. But what we're just introducing is our name, where we are, our place of origin, where we're currently located, and what struck us about this moment we're in with COVID-19. Is it the fragility of healthcare systems? Is it the kindness of strangers? Is it the fact that you love not commuting? So please feel free to share amongst yourselves.
Okay. So I guess should I?
Yes, feel free, Adjoa.
Oh, okay. All right. So again, I'm Adjoa Duker of Ghanaian descent. And right now, well, I'm a family physician and I also have a background in public health. So for myself and fellow frontline health workers, yeah, it's been a very challenging time. I myself, I'm not based in the hospital, I'm based in an office practice. And so we had to kind of shift all of our, we had to basically close down the office. It just became too risky. We had, patients who had coronavirus symptoms. And so we were being exposed and we didn't have our full protective, masks. We didn't have the proper N95 masks. We didn't have the proper gowns. So it became very risky for all of us. And even one of the doctors in our practice did test positive for COVID. So we were exposed and many of us found difficulty even getting tested. So, I mean, what this is definitely revealing that even in America, the healthcare system is pretty broken. And what I've realized is that sadly, there is little regard for the health of my fellow physicians and nurses. Already there's been a number of nurses and physicians who have died from coronavirus. And the fact that early on, doctors and nurses were saying that, we don't have the proper masks, the N95 masks, we don't have full gear. And still these healthcare workers were being put on the front lines and potentially bringing home coronavirus to their families. And so it's just sad that in the beginning, there hasn't been a big push for screening and testing of healthcare workers. So, I mean, there's been a lot of protests. So, even for the past few weeks, I've been doing telemedicine. So basically virtual visits. And so even doing these virtual visits, we still encounter patients who do have coronavirus symptoms, and then we have to manage them. And this is, new for all of us. So yeah, it's definitely been a trying time. Yeah, for sure. And having to self-isolate and yeah, so it's definitely tough all around.
Yeah.
So I'll jump in. Hi, Adjoa, how are you? This is Nana
Hi,
here.
hi.
Hi,
Nana,
as you speak, my sister, as you know, Nabia is a physician in New York, and it's been really tough. She's frankly been in isolation for 4 weeks. She had symptoms. She was testing. A lot of her patients, a lot of her colleagues frankly, most of the practice is out because the doctors are sick. A nurse called her, a nurse in the ER called her 2 days ago, last week, and said, she's been having a fever and she's been still asked to work. And they didn't want to test the doctors. She had to be tested in New Jersey. And the nurse finally got tested. She was positive. She said, I just gave it around the place. And another doctor, a friend of hers, someone in her practice, who's the only one who's left, Olufunke, is Nigerian. She ended up going to the hospital. And she just called my sister yesterday and said, I have symptoms. And my sister said to stay home. So people are calling her, even though she's still not out of the room. I actually expected her to be out today, and she's not. But it's been really tough trying to manage the girls and homeschool, and the older one has special needs, and me trying to manage doctor, because they've also not been well a little bit for different reasons. But I realize that healthcare workers are really not taken care of, as the CEO for a hospital is in Florida in his $2 million mansion. Oh yeah, you didn't know.
Wow. And his comfort, not
right. And so this is also a sign that all her friends are really, her colleagues are really angry right now. Doing their best to support patients and take care of patients, take care of their families as well. And here is your CEO in Florida in his mansion saying, I'm working from home because I'm over 70.
Yes.
Well, so are the other heads of hospitals in New York. So it's been
Right.
really eye-opening, I think, for everyone. And I think that this is a time where we all need to pray and send healing energy to our healthcare workers, because this is not, they have not been protected and they're not been taken care of.
So let me ask a question.
Disregard.
A question, and thank you, Ajwa, for bringing that to the group, and Nana for sharing your experience as someone who's has a close family member who is on the front lines. How many of you, and you can just give me a thumbs up in your reaction or just raise your hand, know of, have friends, your family, or yourself are working in healthcare, just so we can kind of get a sense on the call? So quite a few people. And I guess my question, and maybe Ajwa, because you brought this to the group and other people can chime in, please use the hand raising function or just raise a point in the chat. But Ajwa, from a community, what would be helpful for you at this point in time as you're dealing with this reality? And then maybe you can also tell us as well, someone who's helping your sister with childcare and the rest, what can we do to support those of you better who are on the front lines dealing with these issues?
I think basically one main thing is the public, has been demonstrating, support for healthcare workers. In general, most of us have been feeling underappreciated and not valued for the sacrifices that we make. And this crisis definitely has revealed kind of like this underlying sentiment of disregard for healthcare workers' own health. So the general public, everyone is kind of cheering for healthcare workers now, realizing, the great sacrifices that we make, but they need to really advocate for healthcare workers to be tested for coronavirus, because what we are the silent spreaders. We're being exposed. Those who are still going into the office, they're not having their temperatures taken. They are not, there's not large scale screening. Even when I had symptoms last month, I was referred to get testing like 15 miles from where I live in Staten Island, which is ridiculous. Why would I need to either take a ferry or drive my car? I didn't even drive my car far. Why should I have to travel that distance? So there's been a complete lack of regard. In New York City in particular, there's been wide-scale testing of police officers. So they actually have numbers of police officers who tested positive for coronavirus. You don't have those numbers for physicians and nurses. Already there's been several nurses who have died. There's been several physicians who have died. And some of them didn't have any underlying health issues or diseases. So that's what needs to be, at the forefront. There needs to be wide-scale testing of healthcare workers. I mean, in Italy, over 80 doctors and nurses have died. In New York City, those numbers so far that I know of, maybe around 10. But there's probably lots more that are unaccounted for because there hasn't been wide-scale screening and testing.
Wow.
So that's something that really needs to.
So I'm seeing a question just coming through the chat as why on healthcare workers not being tested. And I remember about 5 weeks ago when my sister was starting to test, the concern was then that they didn't have enough test kits. And so if we're going to test all our doctors, and literally that was some of the feedback she got. Like, we will not be able to test our patients who are sick because our doctors are not sick yet, and therefore we need to save the kits, and we only have X amount allotted for a particular practice or location. That was actually the feedback from above. So it's unfortunately what everyone's going to start seeing is when the healthcare workers are not there, right?
Yeah.
Then everyone's in trouble. But that was a priority.
And Nana, you raise a very good point. Just in terms of, I was reading today that at the start of the epidemic, WHO manufactured something like 1.4 million tests, offered them to the US, and the administration said, no, thank you, we'll create our own. And then they botched the manufacturing of tests in America, right? So I think to Ajwa's point about advocacy, but I'd be interested in hearing as well from other people who are close to healthcare workers in other parts of the world. Are you finding the same thing around doctors and nurses not being able to be tested, or is this something that is unique to the US? Any thoughts on that? or any additional thoughts that people might have of things that came up during your conversation, because we were speaking with Ajua about healthcare, but what are some of the other things that came up during your introductions that really struck you about this particular moment in time? I know that I was eavesdropping on one group who grew up in the same hood as me from Silver Spring. Whose group was that? My former neighbors.
That was my group.
Okay.
The
And
head wrap group,
the
I
head
think.
wrap group. Everyone in that group had a head wrap on. You see, this is
Yeah.
the beauty, guys, of coming to forums of African women. And so for you, what were some of the things that came out in your group as having struck people?
Yes. So I think Petula mentioned solidarity that she has seen in Cameroon amongst different people and different actors, just trying to see what they can do for each other. But along those lines, I also mentioned just a feeling of being overwhelmed. I work on family planning here in DC, and I work in a global secretariat, and I am constantly loaded with information from the WHO, from Gates, from all sorts of corners. And I see that so many people want to do something, but we are overwhelmed because you don't even know where to start. So I think that's one of the things that has struck me, just the sense of feeling overwhelmed, and there's so much information, but you don't even know what to do with the information. So those are a couple of things we discussed in our group.
Yeah, thank you for surfacing that. I think there is a lot of information, and I think there is a lot of overwhelm, no matter the various capacities in which we work. And as Auntie Abby is pointing out, when we were speaking earlier just about the disproportionate impact on Africans, the fact that 10 of the healthcare workers who passed away in New York City last week were actually Ghanaian, that is saying something. And interestingly, in Brazil, and perhaps Auntie Abby, I can just unmute you, you can share a little bit with the group from your perspective in Latin America. Please go ahead.
Yes, we're in a peculiar position in Brazil where it seems the president has decided that, you know, everything about Trump needs to be copied. So like in the United States, the people on the front line in terms of organizing how to respond are the governors of the states, because the federal government, in this case, the president was, you know, he was a denier, conspiracy theorist, and at the very beginning was doing things like going out in public. This despite the fact that now 24 of the people who were with him on that trip to Florida have tested positive. This has made Brasilia one of the most rapidly growing places of the spread in the country. And what is disturbing is it's now become the community spread. The difference, I would say, between Brazil and the United States is that the key people in the government, including the justice minister, pretty much responsible for guaranteeing the election of this president, have been fighting him. So he's openly fighting against his Minister of Justice, his Minister of Health, his Minister of Agriculture. I think it's been avoided now, but last week he was doing behaviors that threatened to create a constitutional crisis over the management of this. But the state governors are trying. Brazil has a very robust healthcare system in terms of access and availability. The theory is good. People have access and so on, much better than the United States. But in practice, like everywhere else, even at the best of times, they're overwhelmed. And so the systems are getting overwhelmed. People are losing their jobs and not quite know where to turn. There is a stimulus package that is being created like now. In our community, in the Ghanaian community, it's been heartwarming to see in places like Brasilia and Sao Paulo, the way the community organizations have stepped in to support their members who have lost jobs and things like that. But, you know, I have a good friend, he's a pastor here at Lighthouse Church. His wife is a doctor. She's having to live in a hotel away from her husband and children and is on call and is, you know, they are working overtime. Yeah. But I do think, at least in Brasilia, the medical people have been tested, but it is uneven. It's not the same around the country.
Thank you for that perspective, Auntie Abby. And I've asked each of you in the chat, just if you could say where you're located and rate the responsiveness of your government on a scale from 1 to 10. So for instance, Moyatu in New Jersey is saying it's an 8. And just so we're clear, 1 is terrible, 10 is Beyonce, like you're the best thing to ever walk the earth in terms of the response. So Sierra Leone, you've given a 7. We see that Cameroon is getting 4. And Selama Vit, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. I'm just going to unmute you. And if you could please first teach me how to pronounce your name, and secondly, ask your question. Go ahead. I think we've lost her due to connections. So we're seeing that in places like Ethiopia, people think the response is rather good. Belgium, Brazil is midway, Maryland is a 9, and I'd say in South Africa, we're sitting at round about a 9 as well in terms of a response. Now, I'd also be interested to know, what do you feel as African women that there are resources that you are able to access or that have been articulated that can specifically help you? Ajwa has said no, definitely not as a healthcare practitioner, but I'm curious to hear, for instance, from people in the group who might be entrepreneurs or who might work in SMMEs. What has the impact of COVID-19 been on you, and what, if any, resources have you been able to access? And perhaps Moyatu, I'll just ask you to speak from the perspective of someone who does a lot of work in the business space. What have you seen, and what do you think we ought to be looking at and asking questions about?
Thank you very much, Obenewa. Thanks to everybody for your contribution so far. Definitely learning a lot. I think definitely this has been a huge hit on small businesses. I think in the US, we're seeing a lot of small businesses that are really struggling. I think the difference between the US and many countries across the continent is there's a lot of bailouts. So there's grants that, for instance, I believe I'm forgetting his name. He owns Shea Moisture. He's a big investor. He just released a huge grant fund for African-American women to apply for grant funding for their business, small businesses and things like that. So we're seeing a lot of that kind of collective philanthropy in the US around small businesses. I think across the continent, particularly, I mean, in Sierra Leone and some of the other places that I work, I'm definitely seeing that people are definitely having to pivot a lot of the work that they've been doing, especially if your business is something that involves service or product delivery where you have to move around. And if you're in a country where there's any type of restriction of movement, then it's definitely slowing down business, which is ultimately impacting kind of the economic side of things. I have seen a lot of innovation. I think one thing that I always find really amazing about African women is we know how to pivot, and we are super innovative in times of adversity. So for instance, a colleague of mine who owns solutions, an HR solutions business, has been doing trainings for companies around COVID-19, how to handle COVID-19 in the workplace, right? Another colleague of mine, she owns a business in Liberia that is a skincare kind of business and has a shop and everything. So the shop has had to close down because they're on lockdown. And now she's doing kind of skin consultations with her clients. I think one of the most important things that I've been sharing with clients and just articles that I've been writing around this with my business, WCA Creatives, is the importance of really, one, taking care of ourselves as small business owners and making sure that you're well, And also thinking of really what does my customer need at this time, and being very empathetic to that and really listening to the needs. And that's what I found with the businesses that I've been blessed to work with. That pivoting is happening because they're listening to their customers, they're paying attention to what's happening, they're thinking of ways, okay, how do I offer reduced fees in certain things, because you're thinking, okay, how are people going to be affording certain things? Thinking of pro bono work with some people that could potentially lead to leads. So really being very creative, but also being very empathetic about what is happening, I think is what is helping a lot of businesses at this time. So that's what I've definitely seen.
And Moyatu, so for those of us who, I think we're all thinking about money and how not to spend it in this moment in time, but for things that are sort of essentials, are there resources that you can point us to where we might be able to find out about African women-owned businesses and how we might be able to patronize those? Or is that something that AWDF might be able to put together, a directory of small business owners who are African women, so that we can circulate that amongst ourselves and really make sure that we're supporting? Because frankly, Jeff Bezos has enough money, right? Like, he's gonna be okay. The rest of us might need a little bit more support from the community, but are there any existing resources that we could potentially draw upon?
Yeah, there's several platforms. For one, my platform, Women Change Africa, has documented a lot of stories about African women in business. You can check that out. There's also AfroL Magazine. AfroL Magazine has done tons of stories on African women entrepreneurs and innovators. There's also She Leads Africa, tons of stories on She Leads Africa about African women businesses. Is there a space? Also, there's Leading Ladies Africa. They also do a lot of tons of story collection. So I think it's a matter of going to some of these key platforms that are owned by African women and driven by African women, right? With the heart of the matter being that we care about our own, and going to those sources and really looking for businesses within your community that you can support, whether they're digital online or whether they're actually within your community. I think that's a brilliant suggestion. I think collective economy is super important at this time. I was sharing in our breakout group that I just had a call this afternoon with my advisor, and one of the things she talked about was this partnership between Apple and Google that just started, I think, like this week. And she said what she thinks is going to happen is there's going to be a lot more collaboration with small businesses and businesses in general after this to really retain the economy. But I don't even think we as African women need to wait until after this. I think, I saw the other day, for instance, there was a virtual marketplace that was hosted by a bunch of women, Black women in Houston, in Texas. That's something that potentially AWDF USA could host, or you could host in your community if you have a network of women entrepreneurs, right? Like, where you just come online, maybe you have a virtual thing, different people talk about their businesses, and then we all just support each other, right? Collective philanthropy, like, how can we keep our own resources within our own community as African women? Yeah.
Abiniwa, I want to just add something.
Please.
Just a couple of things. One, perspective of the self-care, and then the other from the perspective of in terms of pivoting and creating solutions, thinking about how you create solutions to this. So one of the things that I believe as human beings we do very well is that we always think of, if something happens, our first instinct is to think of, how am I going to address this? How am I going to solve this? How am I going to create a solution for this? And I think this public health crisis that we are facing is so unique in so many ways that we can't just think our way through this. If we are going to come out of this differently than we entered, we have to feel our way through it. And that's something that I am sitting with from the perspective of self-care, that it's not enough, or we can't just think alone to be like, okay, let's find a solution. Let's see how I'm going to pivot, because pivoting is happening. But we have to feel it. You have to feel it in your body. What is your body telling you? You have to feel it in your emotions. You have to feel it psychologically. You have to feel it even spiritually if you are a person of faith. You have to feel it from all those angles. And so from the perspective of self-care, one of the things that I am doing is to, whilst I'm thinking my way through this and pivoting, I'm also allowing myself to feel myself through it, to be very awake to the emotions that are happening. What is my body telling me? What is my gut instinct telling me? Even in terms of being a business person, how I am creating solutions for this. And that leads me to my second point. And the second point is from the perspective of thinking. What happens is that a lot of times in situations like this, we are quickly moving and trying to shift and say, okay, how do I catch up with whatever is going on? Because there's a craze. There is a certain hysteria that is also happening because everybody is saying, okay, now we are moving everything virtual. And we think we are shifting or we are changing, but actually we are not. We're just moving everything that we used to do in person to the virtual space. And you may be having 20 meetings and you are asking yourself, how am I taking care of myself? So we have to be very cognizant of that. But I believe that it's important for us to think about, to be sure, so that we don't create permanent or design permanent solutions, to temporary circumstances. And that speaks to the solutions you are creating now. How are they going to be relevant when this is passed, when this has passed? Because this too shall certainly pass. We're not going to live with COVID. Even, whatever happens, this too will pass. So the question I want us to be thinking of wherever we sit, in whatever capacity, are you creating solutions? Are you creating permanent solutions or designing permanent solutions for a temporary circumstance that we are looking at right now? In other words, how are the solutions you are creating now, how would they be relevant post this, so that you don't have to pivot and pivot and pivot again? So I just wanted to put that there for us to really hold it. So think and feel, and don't create permanent solutions or designs for temporary circumstances.
Thank you, Mame. That's a very good point. And with that, I want to come to our sister from Silver Spring, from Maryland, who was speaking about just feeling overwhelmed, because clearly in terms of self-care, and perhaps you all can just give an indication in the chat, maybe just give me a why, if you would be interested in a session where we focus more intensively on self-care, what it means, and actually how to create a self-care practice during this moment in time. And just before we come to you, just to say that there have also been a couple more comments in the chat, and please do keep them coming, where Auntie Abby is asking, why are people rating Ghana a 6? And if that's the case, then Brazil would be a 5. And the response we're getting is that there's mainly been contact tracing, that health professionals similarly are not being tested, again, probably because there's not enough test kits. We have seen, though, fortunately from Ghana, the state response, I think it's healthcare workers are getting 3 months relief. They're also getting bonuses and that type of thing. So hopefully that will help to alleviate some of that situation. Moyatu is also inviting us to join the AfriWomen WhatsApp group. So if you'd like to continue the conversation there, please do use that platform. But again, if you'd be interested in a session on self-care, please just drop me a Y in the chat so that we know to begin to plan for that. Please, my sister, over to you.
Okay. Thanks so much. I am Onyinye, everyone. I am Nigerian American, but based in Silver Spring, Maryland. And I wanted to comment on Moyatu's point about what businesses are doing, especially African-owned businesses, to just alleviate the issues now, and then also tying it into self-care. So last week, I tend to be somebody that does a lot. I run a nonprofit organization, which I want to talk about, like what we're doing. But last week on the self-care part, I was overwhelmed. I mean, this past 2 weeks, it's just been crazy. But last week, I finally said I need a personal assistant. And I put out a call within my mentorship group, because I've been running a mentorship program, and some of my trusted networks, I said, I'm looking for a virtual personal assistant, because I tend to like to do things in a certain way, but I realize that there are young women who want to learn skills, and they also have great skills to offer. So anyway, so for me, that's one way I am taking care of myself, because I almost ran myself down last week. But on the mentorship angle, I run a mentorship program and it's paid, but when we were about to start our second cohort for this year, which was supposed to begin this month, April, because we do it 3 months at a time, I realized that many of the people who applied could not afford to pay for it. And many of them talked about the COVID situation. And so what I decided to do, and I consulted a few of my mentors, was to take a break from the paid program. I wanted to do for like a couple months, but I got advice like, hey, Onyinye, you're still gonna need money. So just let's start with 1 month. So basically right now we're running a free, we're running free sessions. We're doing 3 sessions this month for anybody who is interested. And the first topic we addressed, which was last Saturday, was on resilience. Because I am noticing that the people who are going to get through this situation are resilient people, because so many of us have had our personal plans just swept off our feet. I mean, between weddings, big birthdays, I mean, colleges, whatever it was. But so you're going to need to understand what it means to be resilient. And so we talked about resilience, but specifically how to stay on purpose in the times of, in time of chaos. And we had a fantastic speaker who really just helped us stay centered on our purpose. Like we shouldn't allow the trials around us to keep us distracted. So that was really good. We have another session coming up on this Saturday that's on international development, how to get your foot into international development. And then the week after, we're going to talk about creating a professional profile. So these things are linked to I think Mame's comment about permanent solutions, not just because we realize that a lot of young people, we focus on women age 18 to 35, and we realize that a lot of young women are looking for mentors and they need these skills. And while they're on lockdown right now, many of them are unemployed. They were unemployed before COVID. And if we want to get them into employment, we need to build certain skills within them. So I just wanted to share that as something we're doing. I'm happy to share more information or post a link to our website, but it would be great if you can join the next 2 sessions on Saturday. It's Saturdays by 12 p.m. West African time. And our speaker this weekend is going to be amazing. I mean, many of you might know her, but she's Kemi Badamosi. She's currently based in Uganda, but she has a lot of great international development experience. But yeah, so self-care is important. Get you a PA if you need one. You don't have to pay them too much.
And you know, thank you for that. I think so just a few things coming out of that. I think one, perhaps if you're looking for speakers, I would imagine amongst this group, there are those who'd be willing to raise their hand and volunteer, but also a resource. But to Mame's point about not creating permanent solutions to temporary issues, how do we also see what's happening now, not necessarily as creating our issues, but maybe showing them to us? So like you said, my default setting as a human being is the most. I always want to do the most, right? So with COVID, that sped it up. Now, this was an issue and a tendency that's been there all the time. So rather than seeing it as a problem or challenge, how can I see this situation of COVID as a growth opportunity to manage and to temper that need to do the most or whatever it might be, and to, out of this difficult situation, create, to Mame's point, a solution around myself that will really support me into the future. So it's not that these things are happening simply because COVID happened. They've been there all along. COVID is really just showing them to us and exposing us. And so with that, I want to come to Moyatu, who I believe was going to share some more with us.
Yes, thank you so much. I love all of these suggestions, especially the suggestion around self-care and taking care of ourselves, and just ensuring that we're creating systems and structures that will be there and actually make sense for the work that we're doing. I think one of the things I've gathered from this, as somebody who also owns a non-for-profit in Sierra Leone, is how to be innovative at this time, and not just for COVID-19. So during the Ebola period in Sierra Leone, my organization works with girls. We empower them to become leaders and social change agents. And during the Ebola period, at the time, we had 25 girls. And we learned a lot during that time, because at that time, our team was a team of 2 volunteers. And we lost half of our girls contact with half of our girls during the Ebola period, simply because it was very difficult to keep up with families, what is going on, etc. And even during the Ebola time, we provided a lot of support as far as like food items. We did distant learning opportunities for our families. We had teachers in the US and the UK create kind of educational learning materials for them. Now, fast forward to COVID-19, a lot of the lessons that we learned during the Ebola period were actually very, very beneficial for the COVID-19 period, because even before the government in Sierra Leone had closed down the borders, etc., we had already started putting in a mitigation plan for how we were going to support our staff's well-being, how we were going to ensure that our girls were taken care of. Now we have 264 girls, I believe, in the program. So what does it look like to support our families, even not just during COVID-19, but even after, because we don't know how much longer things may take with the government in Sierra Leone. So that was something I would say, just going back to this idea of temporary solutions, but more so thinking of it long term. So because of what happened during the Ebola period, we developed a very strong mitigation plan should such traumatic experiences happen again within the girls that we work with. So now we're able to kind of to flip that and use it during the COVID-19 period, right? So now our staff is basically rotating and working from home one week and then going to the office the other week, because they just are still getting used to this idea of remote work. The other thing that we've been thinking a lot about, I mean, before the COVID-19 period happened, we've been thinking a lot about what does expansion look like and what does deepening look like with our work. But this has actually sped up a lot of that, because we are now having like strategic conversations about what it looks like to engage girls, not just in Sierra Leone, but across the West Africa sub-region, and not necessarily in a physical way, right? So this is actually, this period also, I think, even in times of difficulty, we see a lot of innovation. And the question is, how do we ensure that we are creating structures that outlast kind of this pandemic, right? Just like what Mame was saying. And so to the point about self-care, one of the things that I shared on my recent podcast, is called Tea and Pepper Soup, is what narratives are you telling yourself? What stories are you telling yourself on a daily basis? And what declarations are you making out loud in the atmosphere on a daily basis? Because I think that also helps us with our mental health. And surrounding yourself with the right people at this time is critical, and knowing what you can take on and what you can't. For instance, there's certain things, certain emails I just can't get to at this point. Like, I'm not responding. I'll send you a one-liner and say, I'll get back to you. I just can't, you know? And just like the sister from Maryland, I can overwhelm myself with a lot. I like to do too much, but I found myself outsourcing little things like, I can't edit this document. Let me hire this person to literally just edit this thing so I can focus on more creative things. So that's what's been really driving my mental health, my well-being. One is definitely my faith. And two is just my creative work, like making sure I'm really engaging much more in the creative aspect of my work. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that, Moyatu. And I think you raise a point that dovetails nicely with some of what's coming through in the chat. So first, Pertulia speaks about the fact that, you know, it's okay if you come out of this pandemic and you don't have an online certificate or get new skills, right? And I think that's one thing to keep in mind. Like, it's a global pandemic. This thing that is happening now around the world is literally unprecedented in human history. It's okay, as Mame says, to slow down, take a seat, and kind of collect yourself. Coming out of this is simply enough. I think, Moyatu, the point that you raise about how do we build mitigation strategies, because just a few years ago, we saw Ebola. In our lifetime, we saw SARS-1, we've seen MERS. It's most likely that this is gonna happen again. So what are we saying in terms of not if this happens again, but when this happens again, what are we creating? And your point about losing touch during the era of Ebola with half of your girls, right? Dovetails with what Mame is asking around how is this impacting market women? Because the truth is, as women who have access to computers and you can be on the internet for over an hour, there's some level of access or resourcing that's available to us that might not be the case for many other women in our communities on the continent. And so I'd like to invite Akuya, who is saying that her thesis is around market women, and that she's just finished research this past December, just to talk a little bit about what she is experiencing, or what you think, Akua, would be relevant for this audience as we think about that segment of our community. Please do share some of your thoughts with us. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for tapping me in. So yes, this past December, I had the opportunity to go back to Ghana and was working with some women in Accra as well as Tema, and just talking about their experiences. And so most of them were video interviews. I've transcribed them, and now I'm in the process of just trying to continue conversation with some of them, get in contact with some of them as well. But to my understanding, how things are now, some of these marketplaces are closed. And so it's like doing guesswork backward in trying to track some of these women down. I'm currently in San Jose, California. So it's been a little tough. But as I go through, I'm definitely going to be mindful and listen to exactly what they need. And in anything I find, if there's any way possible to bring it back to this group, or at least offer some type of check-in, and just keep their needs and their experiences at the forefront. Oh, I believe you're muted.
Your belief was correct. I was definitely talking to the ether. Thank you. With that, I also want to come back to you, Moyato. I see that you've raised your hand, and then we'll just begin to wrap up, because I am mindful of time, and we do want to honor the end time that we had indicated.
Yeah, I was just gonna quick about market women in Sierra Leone and what we've been seeing. So there was a 3-day lockdown about a week ago. So families basically could not go anywhere for 3 days. And unfortunately in Sierra Leone, we can't have super long lockdowns because people will just suffer a lot more. So I think there have been these intermittent lockdowns that are happening. And one group that the mayor of Freetown is paying very close attention to are market women, because, you know, literally what we say in Creole is that's their hand to mouth. It's like they go, they have to sell, and then that's how they make money to feed their families, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the things that the mayor worked on recently was partnering with a couple of designers in the country to create masks for the families, to provide resources for them, et cetera. So I saw a huge drive yesterday just for market women, particularly in Freetown, not the entire country. So a lot of people have also been saying that Freetown is not the only place that, you know, COVID-19 can potentially spread, right? We have provincial areas and things like that. But definitely market women are, I think, at the forefront of feeding Africans and feeding us. But I think when these crises happen, I think they suffer the most, and their children suffer the most, for sure.
Absolutely. So as we think about long-term mitigation and ways to overcome that, that would certainly be a segment of the community to think about and to engage with. And I think particularly, Akua, what you're saying about the research where you're speaking to people and asking them, because I think many of us of African women have had the experience of people telling us what they're going to do for us, or what's good for us, or what we need, as opposed to really engaging us ourselves. So thank you very much for surfacing that. Thank you again for the URL, strongenoughgirls.org. And again, Petulia speaking about sexual and gender-based violence. This is very, very true in terms of cases in Cameroon, in Africa. So for instance, in South Africa, in the first 3 days of our lockdown, we had 87,500 calls to the domestic violence hotline. And that's just people who could call in the first 3 days. In France, so unfortunately, this is also not a uniquely African problem. They have actually had to convert empty hotels into shelters for women who were fleeing domestic violence during the lockdown. So again, many large issues for us to discuss. And you are certainly welcome to stay on the line, and we continue the conversation for a few more minutes. But again, I do want to honor those who do have limited time, and just to highlight some of what I heard during this conversation in terms of potential ways forward for us and solutions. So Ajwa had raised the point, Auntie Abby as well, and others of you, Nana, about the lack of support for healthcare workers. And specifically, Ajwa, you were speaking about a lack of recognition and advocacy. And so perhaps one thing to put forward to the group is, what would it look like for AWDF to perhaps have a statement celebrating, honoring healthcare workers, just putting it out there. We know that in the UK, when there was the Applaud Healthcare Workers, they didn't have any Black or other ethnic minorities, when we know good and well that so many Africans are working in the healthcare fraternity in the UK. That might be a way to acknowledge Auntie Abby, to actually name the healthcare workers who died in service in New York. So that could potentially be one thing that we do. And then also advocacy. So calling your congressmen, for those of you who are in the US, and really making sure that healthcare workers are getting the support that they need. The second thing I heard coming out of this, putting together a list of different entities run by African women. We of course mentioned Kua Ruby, who leads that company, and to look at how not just Kua but other companies we can really support both virtually and in person once that reopens. And again, we'll begin to compile and to circulate a list of those. We also spoke about an additional session on self-care, which we will talk about as a group and come back to you around. And really, to stay in touch, please do sign up for the WhatsApp group to continue that conversation. Akua, we're looking forward to hearing your inputs, and also thinking about engaging with other organizations like Strong Enough Girls, etc., so that even if you're not at the forefront, we can certainly support the efforts of those around us. Before we come to Moyatu for our closing comments and announcements, I would just quickly like to go around, because there are some people whose voices we've not heard, and I feel like it would be such a shame. So we just want to do a one-word checkout, just something that is on your mind that you might not have gotten to share before, a feeling, an emotion, a concern with the group. So I'm going to start with those I haven't heard from, and I'm going to start with you, Gloria, and then we'll go to Alma, and then Cynthia, and then Glory, and we'll keep going. So Gloria, can we just ask you for one word closeout? I've unmuted you.
Sorry.
Gloria, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
So just one word or thought or perspective from your side. Okay, I think that one word or thought or perspective might have been goodbye. Cynthia, for you, anything that you'd like to share with us?
Okay. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. So my name is Cynthia Amo. I'm actually the treasurer for AWDF USA. Sorry I joined late. I had a meeting that ran super over, so I couldn't join early. So one word or something that I want to chip in is, as we talk about self-care, we should also consider how we take care of ourselves now until we should start showing any symptoms. What I've seen here in the United States, especially among the Ghanaian community, a lot of people are using natural herbs to take care of themselves. So Auntie Abby, I mean, I've read different things online about people using natural herbs and even encouraging the government to look into that. So it's something that has been on my mind, and I'll be very happy to see that maybe the government look into that. I was thinking last time, and I was talking to my mom, that if we take the population of people that have been tested positive, maybe we can divide that population into 4 and treat 1/4 of those people with pure natural, like, I mean, it have to be tested, right? We have a lot of great medicine in Africa that maybe we can just use that to test. So we are not just waiting for Chinese or America or any other country to provide this vaccine. If Africa can be very proactive into looking at what we used to treat ourselves, maybe that can be a thing that can really help the continent as a whole. So that's my thought with this whole thing. I've spent so much time researching on things like that. I mean, for me, yeah.
Thank you,
That's what I
Cynthia.
have to say.
Thank you, Cynthia. And perhaps we can just add that to part of the self-care element, just around just overall health and wellness and what we're doing to maintain our well-being generally. Glory, did you want to share a thought or perspective with us? And I'm going to unmute you, Glory. Your one last word.
Well, just to say, I hope I will be able to go through this because my connection has been buffering like crazy. But anyway, just to share that I think that if you are a person of faith, to go inwards and find the peace, because you can find the peace in yourself. If you're not a person of faith, we all are spiritual in one way or the other. So we need to be able to bring ourselves to that place of peace with this situation. And that's where, you know, and once we're grounded in that peace, then we can take on COVID-19 and anything else that it throws our way. That's what I'd like to share.
That's a brilliant thought. Thank you, Glory. So the habits we're developing around inner peace, around faith, that we don't just use it to get through this time of COVID-19, but that it can support us well into the future, learning that inward journey. Thank you for that. So I'm going to come to you, Alma, and then is it Kikeli we've not heard from? And then I believe it's Madam Diop. Just your last words before we head over to Rebecca and then Abiba and Hawa. Alma?
Yes, I'm here. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm Alma, as she rightly mentioned. I am the CEO for Prestige Kente. It's an online Instagram, to be precise, Kente vendor. And so for me, coming into this discussion has been very helpful because I'm one of the people who has been overwhelmed by, you know, how I've had to, you know, take in family. I work from home predominantly, and now with the COVID, everybody's staying at home. It's like everybody's invading my space, kind of, but you know, you have to make measures, and I still work. So you have to put in all the measures like in place to be able to accommodate everybody and still be able to support your employees and all of that. So it has been very refreshing for me to hear how everyone is concerned about, you know, all that is happening and how it is affecting women especially. And for me, I feel very empowered to actually, you know, also go out there to call my voice to help other women who might also be going through, you know, a downturn because of this COVID-19. So yes, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. And please do let us know as things unfold how we might be able to better support you as a community moving forward, particularly as an entrepreneur. Thank you very much, Alma. Kikeli.
Hi. Can
Hi
you hear
there.
me?
Yes.
Yes, hi. I think I just want to say thank you to all of you because this has been a very soul-nourishing conversation. And I think one thing that is coming to my mind is how African women have been innovative and at the forefront of a lot of things that are being mentioned now. And solidarity, for example, solidarity and sisterhood is something that places like AID, WDF have been providing for so many years. So in a way, we have been at the vanguard of change, and I'm very proud of us. And may we stay healthy and safe so that we can continue our work.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for those sentiments, which I think many of us definitely share, that solidarity and sisterhood. So I'm going to come to Abiba, Hawa, Irma, and then Rebecca, who we also have not heard from. Abiba.
Hi. First, thank you all. I've learned a lot and I'm inspired, but I guess I wanted to say solidarity is number one for us as African. Storing food for myself is not good. Let's share it. Share the space. In Africa, we have families living in one bedroom, 10 of them, and there is isolation. How? So solidarity is like open share. And I go to what Mame said, feel from inside. We have to connect and have peace. Corona will kill, and also starvation and lack of so many necessity will kill. So solidarity, have faith in God, use alternative medicine, and let's keep brainstorming because we can come with a solution together.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And you know, as we talk about alternative medicines, and as I come to unmute you, Hawa, one of the things I'm reminded of is that it was an African, it was an enslaved African who introduced the idea of inoculation for smallpox to the Americas. And so just to say that for centuries, we've had ways of doing things that have saved not only ourselves and humanity. So how do we draw on that tradition again? Hawa, over to you. We'd love to hear your voice before we depart.
Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you all for sharing. I want to say that I feel inspired and encouraged. As a Nigerian, I'm based in Newark, New Jersey. I think oftentimes our communities shy away from talking about health and even let alone going to the doctor and talking about mental health issues, some of which many health issues I'm sure will arise from this pandemic. So I feel encouraged by the conversations and transparency and honesty that are being had today. And I'm hoping that this will be something that we continue to carry over to our communities as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Hawa. And Irma, over to you.
Hi, everyone. I think the word that I'd like to close out with is gratitude. I find that when things are particularly difficult, when you take your about what you have rather than what you don't have or what's difficult, it makes the day go by a little bit quicker. So one of the most recent things that I found myself being grateful for was having a lawn to send the children out to play on. I know there are people who don't have that, and I thought, wow, okay, that's something to be grateful for. So just try to find ways to be grateful for the little things that you find you do have. I think it definitely helps to get through the day.
That is brilliant. Thank you, Irma. And I think one of the things echoing that sentiment and what Kikele said is I'm very grateful for this community and the fact that we can have these conversations. And Rebecca, over to you.
Hello, everybody. So my name is Rebecca. I am from Tanzania, and I am 16 years old. So right now I have a lot of anxiety because I don't know when we'll start school again. The school closure, that's what has been on my mind lately. But I'd like to share with you guys the highlights of this pandemic. I have two highlights. So one is that climate change is being reversed because many people are staying inside. So the amount of carbon dioxide emitted to the atmosphere is decreasing. And just today I went outside and the
Rebecca,
sky was so beautiful. It was just beautiful. And the second thing is, and from work, and that has given us a lot of time to practice self-care. Yeah.
Brilliant. Rebecca, I think we're safe in saying that you are by far the youngest person on the call. So we're very glad you're here, very much in the spirit of AFWD, DW, and just really carrying it on. So we've got one of the founding members here, Auntie Abi, and hopefully one of the future members as well. So thank you for being with us, Rebecca, and for sharing about your own feelings and how this has impacted you as a student. I think that we have heard from everyone. And thank you so much, ladies. It's been great to be in conversation with you. I personally feel like it was rather short, but again, this is meant to be the appetizer. We're still preparing the main meal for you, which will have many courses, and look forward to continuing the conversation. So with that, over to you, Moyatu, just to give us our sort of next steps and how we can continue to engage one another.
I'm good. Thank you so much, Afenoa. We really appreciate your just amazing way of facilitating the conversation, and thank you to everybody who really contributed some beautiful things in this session. I really feel really fulfilled and refreshed, so I thank God for that. The first thing is just wanted to share briefly that currently, I mean, after this, we'll definitely be reaching out with a follow-up survey just to get a sense from everybody what types of additional gatherings you'd like to see in our AfriWomen Hangouts. So we have one coming up around kind of our investments as African women, how are African women really fueling lessening the effects of COVID-19. So really looking at philanthropy in different ways. So that's our next event coming up. And what does philanthropy look like for the future for African women's philanthropy? So we're going to have an amazing, one of our sisters who works with our sistership organization, the Mothership in Ghana, Abigail Bergeson from AWDF. She'll be joining us. So we hope that we see some of you definitely on that conversation. And of course, we will have several others after this. That is our hope. And so please stay engaged. One, by filling out that survey that comes out. Two, please join the WhatsApp group. The link is in the chat. We'll make sure that we also circulate it in the follow-up email. We also have what is called our Amplify Her campaign. The Amplify Her campaign is a storytelling campaign that we hope can uplift you at this time. We know that there is so much happening in the diaspora that African women are doing, as well as on the continent. And the campaign really exists to tell our stories in a way that has never been told before through the lens of social impact, sisterhood, and philanthropy. So one, definitely check out the stories on our social media pages at AWDF USA. On Instagram, it's at AWDF_USA, but everywhere else it's at AWDF USA, the African Women's Development Fund USA. Check out the stories, get inspired, because I know this is a really hard time, but I trust me, you'll be inspired by some amazing women who have been highlighted, Obenewa being one of them. Also, if you know anybody who you think should be highlighted in this campaign, definitely reach out to us. I'll definitely drop our email here just so you're aware of it, but there's a way to definitely submit stories and things like that. Alongside with the Amplify Her, we're also raising funds to be able to continue telling these stories. So if you're interested in supporting, just go to our website at www.awdfus.org. And you can definitely support the campaign that way. So we look forward to seeing everybody. This has really been amazing. I mean, just having an intergenerational gathering of so many beautiful African women is really just amazing. So thank you all. Thank you.
Mayatu, I think maybe the 10 for 10,000, if you want to, and that we will talk a little bit more about that for the philanthropy one, but just if you want to just mention that briefly.
Yeah, yes, for sure. So just along the lines of fundraising for the Amplify Her campaign is what is called our 10 for 10,000 campaign and 1,000 campaign. And the idea is to raise the visibility and the stories of 1,000 African women this year in different ways, in the digital space, in the offline space, etc. And so we are raising funds around that. We have 3 different ways that we are engaging people to contribute to that campaign. The first is by echoing her. So we call that the Echo Her level, where you amplify the story of one woman, and I believe we said for a gift of $10. And then we have our Magnify Her, which you get to amplify the stories of, I believe we said 5 women for $50. And then we have our third level, which is our Amplify Her level, where you can tell the stories of 10 women for $100. So there are different levels. Definitely check out our campaign online. And if you feel like, hey, I really want to support, 10 of the sisters on this line, I want to hear their stories. I really want to support at the Amplify level. Or I want to magnify stories of 5 women on this, even on this call, or those of you who have communities of women that you gather. And you're like, you know what? I really want to tell the stories of these women. Please, please, please definitely support the campaign. Share the campaign widely. And we'd love, love, love to tell your stories. Thank you so much.
Mame, any closing remarks from you? Wait, let's, okay.
Sorry. I was going to say, I don't know if Auntie Abby wants to say something briefly, and then I would just shut it out, and then Obenewa would just take it home.
Okay, not really, except this has been wonderful. Thank you. Everybody come to the next one, and everybody share ideas so that we will continue to occupy more and more space. And yeah, really check out the work we're doing, not only as AWDF USA, but each of you as individuals are involved in things. And so let's share that network and create that solidarity so that we're all supporting each other and know what each other are doing and know our stories. This is great. Thank you.
And so I'll add that for me, there are the three words that I'm sitting with as I sit here. One is gratitude, and the other one is attitude, and the other one is fortitude. So I'm sitting with these three words: gratitude, attitude, and fortitude. Gratitude for the space that we are able to create. Attitude in terms of how am I showing up throughout this process, and how will I emerge? What are the things I'm going to do? What is the perspective that I'm going to take? What is the attitude? I mean, we have the saying that it's 10% of what happens to us is just what we do, but the 90% is our attitude towards it. And so what is my perspective and attitude towards that? And then the last of which is fortitude is how am I building my resilience? Because we know that difficult moments actually give us opportunity to build resilience. And so how am I building my capacity and my fortitude to soar? Because like the eagle, it is when they are in the clouds, when the storms are higher, that the eagle finds its wing to soar. And as much as this is a difficult situation, I know that there's a juxtaposition that is happening where all the difficulties are eclipsed by blessings, by gifts, by opportunities. And if we can open ourselves and we can feel our way through this, we will soar out of this in incredible ways, like who we are as African women and like the ancestors and the foremothers who have come before us. We will soar our way out of this. And so with that, I want to say a big thank you. I am just so great. You have no idea. I'm going to be doing a dance like, don't get me started. Let me just take it back right now. So thank you. And I want to especially register my thanks to you, Obenewa, because I remember, Obenewa happens to be family, so I can twist her arms anywhere I want. But I remember, setting up a time and we're just going to check in. And as we're going to check in, the one thing Obenewa asked me, she said, "Mommy, what can I do to support?" That was the question she asked me. And in the spirit of sisterhood, those are the questions we need to be asking. How can I be of support to you? How can I show up for you? How can you show up for me? And that conversation led us to here. And so Obenewa, God richly bless you for that conversation.
Thank you, Mom, and
then,
thank you.
And then the two other people I want to thank is Nana, who is sitting right there, and Moyatu. So all of us are on the same team. Myself, Moyatu, Nana, Cynthia, we, hold a lot at AWDF USA. As a board, we do all of this pro bono because we believe in what we want to walk our talk, period, right? And I know so much that Nana holds, I know so much that Moyatu holds, but everybody just shows up with their full selves. And it's because of all of our work that this has happened. So Nana and Moyatu, God richly bless you and increase you and give you all the strength you need to keep getting us forward and doing what we need to do, this mandate that we have. So God bless you.
Ladies, thank you so much for coming. Thank you to our leadership for creating this space and for having the foresight to create an organization like AWDF, Auntie Abby. And really, I know it's very bad form for me to quote a man at a women's event as we prepare to close, but he was a man who was a feminist, so hopefully you'll allow me. But the words that come to mind are those of Thomas Sankara when he said, "We must dare to invent the future." And I think the truth is that COVID-19 gives us an unprecedented opportunity to invent a new future in which no one is at the margins, but in which we're really all at the center. And that as African women who come from a history of innovation, that we can be at the vanguard of daring to invent that new future. So thank you so much. And until the next time, good day and God bless.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. Maybe Moyatu, Nana, if we can stay on a little bit. And Cynthia too, if you want to stay, if you are able to. All right.
Nana, go.
Oh, what happened to Nana? Nana, come back.
No, she's gone.
Yeah, she's gone. Let me just,
Oh.
Is she back?
And Cynthia left too. Okay, I'm going to end the recording.